All right. Sorry, I don't talk much beyond talking on the mic here, so that's why my voice always sounds funny when I first start, because I've just been sitting here silently by myself for however long since the last time I talked to you, basically. All right. So, we're going to get into this discipline and punishment book, and even more specifically, we're going to look into what is the concept of a panopticon. And we can ask the question if we are living in a panopticon right now. Now, I learned about this book. I had to read this book for my first year political science class in college. And yeah, I mean, the teacher was pretty cool, but he was definitely a communist. So keep that in mind when we're going through this book. I'm not sure if Michel Foucault is a communist, but I think he might be a socialist type of person, because Europeans tend to be more socialist leaning, even the like right wing ones. So first we'll just I'll just give you like a summary of the book, and so that you can check out the Wikipedia page yourself. But basically what Michel Foucault is laying out in the book is the material history of, how prisons developed, from first starting out as basically just putting someone in a dungeon, and then Christians came in, and then they're like, well, if we put them in a dungeon with the Bible, that will help, right? And then as industrialization and all that stuff came along, they started to adapt and use the same methods that they were using for industrialization as they were used to put people in the prisons. So one of the concepts in the book is about architecture and how architecture excuse me, is about architecture and how architecture is used to psychologically, I don't want to say manipulate, because it's not always manipulate, but to activate certain emotions in the psychology. Like, for example, the reason why they build the ceilings so high in a cathedral is to force you to look up. That's why it's like, you know what I'm saying? Think about it. The architecture actually forces your neck to lean back, because you want to look at the beautiful ceiling so much. And it's a subliminal, subtle way that the architecture changes your perception, right? Because when you walk into the cathedral and you can kind of see in the back, and you're like, oh, it keeps going up, and then you look up, and before you know it, you're leaning back, your head back, and you're looking up at the ceiling. And you didn't decide to do that, right? You didn't walk in, you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lean my head back and look up. It's just that the architecture itself, demands that you look up almost. You see what I'm saying? So in the same way, a lot of the people are looking at a lot of the different structures in society, and actually the actual architectural style and shape of the building, and how that has an effect on the human psyche, right? So I know that kind of sounds a little disjointed, but we're going to jump over to the Panopticon real quick. I mean, one of the other main points in his book was that he was questioning whether or not the old dungeon system was actually better than the system that we have now, for the reason that he made the point that basically people learn how to become more criminal when they're put in general population in a prison. Like, for example, someone might go into prison for petty theft. Then they'll be put in a ward with all thieves, and what will they talk about all day? How to commit theft. They'll be in there, a guy that stole a loaf of bread will be in there with a jewel thief, with someone who robs banks at gunpoint, with someone who mugs old ladies, just trading tips all day, right? So it does make sense that putting the way that he made an analogy in the book was similar to hospitals. He's like, if you put a bunch of people that have the same disease all in the same ward in the same room, all it's going to do is amplify the viral infection, amplify whatever transmissible disease is there, right? So that's like the main point of his book, basically, is that he was really questioning the prison system and if the prison system was actually for rehabilitation at all, or if it was possible to rehabilitate people in that type of a prison system. Okay, so now let's just look at the Panopticon. The Panopticon is a design of institutional building with an inbuilt system of control, originated by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. The concept is to allow all prisoners of an institution to be observed by a single prison officer without the inmates knowing whether or not they are being watched. Although it is physically impossible for the single guard to observe all the inmates' cells at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they are being watched motivates them to act as though they are all being watched at all times. They are effectively compelled to self-regulation. The architecture consists of a rotunda with an inspection house at its center. From the center, the manager or staff are able to watch the inmates. Bentham conceived the basic plan as being equally applicable to hospitals, schools, sanatoriums, which is like insane asylums, and asylums. He devoted most of his efforts to developing a design for a panopticon prison, so the term now usually refers to that. And here you can see some designs of the Panopticon. These are some of the earliest designs. I actually saw one of these. It's like, yeah, it's crazy. They were building these like in the 1800s. And see here you have the central guard tower, and then, the inmates can't see the guards. So then they're, even though they can be in general population, they're supposed to be afraid that they can be punished at any time. And there could be a guard in there. There could not even be a guard in there at certain times. And people will still act as if there's a guard there because they don't know if there's a guard there or not, right? And then you see, it's like a circle. And then it gives the people in the central circle, the circle that has all the power to observe everyone else, right? They have complete control because you don't know when they're watching you, right? You can't tell. There could be no one there. It could be a Potemkin village, no one there. And you'd still behave because you don't know if they're there or not. Here's another design. See, it's all about that central tower and everyone around the central tower not knowing if they're going to be observed or not. Oh, Big Brother's watching you, huh? Central Police Station, Munich, Germany, 1973. Is that a Banksy? The word panopticon derives from the Greek word for all-seeing, panoptes. In 1785, Jeremy Bentham, an English social reformer and founder of utilitarianism, traveled to Khrushchev in Mogilev Governorate of the Russian Empire, modern Belarus, to visit his brother Samuel, who accompanied Prince Potemkin. That's funny. Bentham arrived in Khrushchev in early 1786 and stayed for almost 2 years. While residing with his brother in Khrushchev, Bentham sketched out the conception of the Panopticon in letters. Bentham applied his brother's ideas on the constant observation of workers to prisons. So, let me just pause right here for a second. Whenever someone says there's no such thing as a social engineer, when people say, oh, there's social engineers, I mean, what do you call this job? People sitting around discussing, how we're going to change society, and like they're the people with the power to do it. They're just like sketching notes and sending letters to, hey, how about we imprison everyone this way? Or what do you think about this theory of imprisoning everyone? How about we imprison everyone this way? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, what else do you call that job except a social engineer, right? You're like, well, we can mentally manipulate them by putting the tower in the center, and then they'll be forced to do what we say. Like, I mean, what other job is that besides social engineer? Bentham applied his brother's ideas on the constant observation of workers to prisons. Back in England, Bentham, with the assistance of his brother, continued to develop his theory on the Panopticon. Prior to fleshing out his ideas of a Panopticon prison, Bentham had drafted a complete penal code and explored fundamental legal theory. While in his lifetime, Bentham was a prolific letter writer. He published little and remained obscure to the public until his death. So basically, it's just like these people. They're influencing society, but nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows who the actual people who are putting forth these plans to change society. They're in the background. No one hears about them, right? What you hear about is the politicians that they're basically paying to enact these laws and these systems. And then when you vote for the politicians, it gives the illusion of legitimacy. Because basically these guys, these social engineers, these high-level people, they present these ideas to the politicians. And they tell the politicians, we want to enact these policies, these organizations, these architecture styles and imprisonment systems, right? And then they have two politicians. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. They're both working for the same people. They both want to enact this plan of turning the prisons into this, right? Changing it from, the Christian way of putting someone in a cell with the Bible to this new system where they watch everybody, but then they let all the criminals hang out together and exchange crime notes. Right? And then so you see the public facing part of it. Think of it as like a business, right? Like a corporation, right? When you interface with a corporation, you interface with a corporation through their branding. Say for instance, Planters Peanuts. You see Planters Peanuts through the Planters Peanut guy, right? That's who you interface with. The Planters Peanut guy buying the peanuts at the store, right? But who's making all the decisions are the people in the Planters Peanut Corporation. They're deciding how many peanuts are going to go in each can, how much salt, how much, spices or whatever else they put on the peanuts, how long they're going to toast them, right? And then they bring them to market, and then you either buy them or you don't buy them. And then there's two brands. There's Planters and then there's store brand. But if you want peanuts, you're still getting the same thing. You're still getting the same system, right? And then in order to make it legitimate, they say, well, hey, you had a choice between store brand and Planters, and you chose store brand or you chose Planters. So see, you have free association. You have free will. You did it all on your own. It was your fault. The voters, you did it, not the people that are doing these high level public policy planning initiatives where they're sitting there and using AI now and planning with groups of highly intelligent people how to guide and lead and manipulate society. Libertarian paternalism is one of these concepts. Communism, central planning is one of these concepts. Environmentalism, communism is one of these concepts. You know, most authoritarian type government is one of these concepts, right? And then above that, that's where, you know, you got the UN, the World Bank, you know, all those things that are referred to as globalists, right? The, what's it called? The World Economic Forum, the Bank for International Settlements, all these things work together. And these people they're not all the same group, right? Like the World Economic Forum and say they'll have some group in Europe. They'll have some different group in Russia. They'll have a different group in China, in Japan, right? But in total, they all are accountable to this World Economic Forum, United Nations, global bank system, right? And so whenever the World Economic Forum is discussing policy and plans and things like that, it gets disseminated down, you know, to the bank level, and then the bank disseminate the plan down to the government level, and then the government presents the plan that they already have planned out to you as store brand or Planters. And then when you get screwed over because it was their plan to screw you over in the first place, they turn around and tell you, well, hey, you voted for it. It's the voters' problem. It's the voters' fault. Okay, let's get back into it. Bentham thought that the chief mechanism that would bring the manager of the Panopticon prison in line with the duty to be humane would be publicity. Bentham tried to put his duty and interest junction principle into practice by encouraging a public debate on prisons. Bentham's inspection principle applied not only to inmates of the Panopticon prison, but also the manager. The accountable gaoler was to be observed by the general public and public officials. The apparently constant surveillance of the prison inmates by the Panopticon manager and the occasional observation of the manager by the general public was to solve the age-old philosophic question, who guards the guards? Right? Because that doesn't happen. I mean, my brother worked at the jail in Newark for like a year. He was telling me stories, man. I mean, basically, the guard thing is a mafia in itself. Like, the whole prison guard system, they're their own mafia. I mean, you can look up stories of stuff in Newark. I remember there was this one story where the guards had helped two inmates to escape by, you know, giving them cell phones. And it's like, okay, how do people get drugs in jail? How do people get like knives and guns and things like that in jail? Like, people have guns in jail. Like, watch a video on like Rikers on like the, you know, stuff that they take from people in Rikers Island. And you'll see, it's like, how'd someone get a gun in jail? It's like, oh, people are smoking weed in jail. Like, think about it, right? They're telling you that they're going to be able to figure out how to ban weed, but they can't even ban that shit in jail. Like, you could get weed in jail. You could get heroin in jail. But they're going to ban it out here, though. Right? It's ridiculous. Okay. But yeah, the question of who guards the guards, who's making sure, because it's like, what's the point of a prison? What is the point of it? Is it just to like beat people up and punish people and it's like literally like a place where the people that are the worst criminals actually are elevated to, it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like they're elevated to the height of the highest part of the hierarchy. And then like some guy that's there because he missed a couple child support payments, he's in fear for his life. Right? But then the murderer, he's getting high fives and people are shouting him out in rap songs. You know, ass backwards. No pun intended. Right? And the fact that you could even be put in jail for missing child support payments goes against the Constitution, because you're not supposed to be able to be put in jail for debt. Bentham continued to develop the Panopticon concept as industrialization advanced in England, and an increasing number of workers were required to work in even larger factories. Bentham commissioned drawings from an architect, Wiley Reveley. Bentham reasoned that if the prisoners of the Panopticon prison could be seen but never knew when they were watched, the prisoners would need to follow the rules. Bentham also thought Reveley's prison design could be used for factories, asylums, hospitals, schools, and just the general public. Just the general public. They don't add that one in there. But yeah, just the general public too. I'm sure you've seen that before, where they just have, you know, a police car parked on the side of the road doesn't even have a police officer in it, and people are following the speed limit. Right? Bentham remained bitter throughout his later life about the rejection of the Panopticon scheme, convinced that it had been thwarted by the king and an aristocratic elite. It was largely because his sense of injustice and frustration that he had developed his issues of sinister interest, that is, a vested interest of the powerful conspiring against the wider public interest, which underpinned many of his broader arguments for reform. The building, circular, an iron cage, glazed, a glass lantern about the size of a rangla, don't know that word. The prisoners in their cells occupying the circumference, the officers, the center, by blinds and other contrivances the inspectors concealed from the observation of the prisoners, hence the sentiment of a sort of invisible omnipresence. The whole circuit reviewable with little or, if necessary, without any change of place. Bentham's proposal for a Panopticon prison met with great interest among British government officials, not only because it incorporated the pleasure-pain principle developed by the materialist philosopher Thomas Hobbes, but also because Bentham joined the emerging discussion on political economy. Bentham argued that the confinement of the prison is his punishment, preventing the prisoner from carrying the work to another market. So they're just trying to bring back slavery, basically. Key to Bentham's proposal and efforts to build a Panopticon prison in Millbank at his own expense was the means of extracting labor out of the prisoners in the Panopticon. In his 1791 writing, Panopticon, or the Inspection House, excuse me, Bentham's Panopticon prison concepts to the National Legislative Assembly in revolutionary France. In 1812, persistent problems with Newgate Prison and other London prisons prompted the British government to fund the construction of a prison in Millbank at the taxpayers' expense. Based on Bentham's Panopticon plans, the National Penitentiary opened in 1821. Millbank Prison, as it became known, was controversial and developed a poor reputation due to outbreaks of disease. Nevertheless, the British government placed an increasing emphasis on prisoners doing meaningful work instead of engaging in humiliating and meaningless kill times. Yeah, reading the Bible is really humiliating. Bentham lived to see Millbank Prison built and did not support the approach taken by the British government. His writings had virtually no immediate effect on the architecture of taxpayer-funded prisons that were to be built. Between 1818 and 1821, a small prison for women was built in Lancaster. It had been observed that the architect Joseph Gandy modeled it very closely on Bentham's Panopticon prison plans. The K-Wing, near Lancaster Castle Prison, is a semi-rotunda with a central tower for the supervisor and 5 stories with 9 cells on each floor. All right, they're just kind of talking about the history of where they're built. There's a bunch of them, where they started building them. What else are they talking about? Let's look at the criticism. In 1965, the conservative historian Shirley Robin Tetwin traced the Fabian zest. Yeah, see, that's Fabian socialism, which is like basically a slow changing and taking over of society, of socialism, by changing the norms of the old society slowly over time, instead of like the way that the communists did it in World War II, where they just attacked the government directly. Okay, sorry. Shirley Robin Tetwin traced the Fabian zest for social planning to early utilitarian thinkers. She argued that Bentham's pet gadget, the Panopticon prison, was a device of such monstrous efficiency that it left no room for humanity. She accused Bentham of forgetting the dangers of unrestrained power and argued that, in his ardor for reform, Bentham prepared the way for what he feared. Recent libertarian thinkers began to regard Bentham's entire philosophy as having paved the way for totalitarian states. In the late 1960s, the American historian Gertrude Himmelfarb, who had published The Haunted House of Jeremy Bentham in 1965, was at the forefront of depicting Bentham's mechanisms of surveillance as a tool of suppression and control. David John Manning published The Mind of Jeremy Bentham in 1986, in which he reasoned that Bentham's fear of instability caused him to advocate ruthless social engineering and a society in which there could be no privacy or tolerance for the deviant. In the mid-1970s, the Panopticon was brought to the wider attention of the French psychoanalyst Jacques-Alain, or I forget how to pronounce that, Jacques-Alain Miller, and the French philosopher Michel Foucault. In 1975, Foucault used the Panopticon as a metaphor for the modern disciplinary society in Discipline and Punishment. He argued that the disciplinary society had emerged in the 18th century, and that discipline are techniques for assuring the ordering of human complexities with the ultimate aim of docility and utility in the system. Foucault first came across the Panopticon architecture when he studied the origins of clinical medicine and hospital architecture in the second half of the 18th century. He argued that discipline had replaced the pre-modern society of kings, and that the Panopticon should not be understood as a building, but as a mechanism of power and a diagram of political technology. Foucault argued that discipline had already crossed the technological threshold in the late 18th century when the right to observe and accumulate knowledge had been extended from the prison to hospital, school, and later the factories. In his historic analysis, Foucault reasoned that with the disappearance of public executions, pain had been gradually eliminated as punishment in a society ruled by reason. The modern prison in the 1970s, with its coercive technology, was rooted in the changing legal powers of the state. While acceptance for corporal punishment diminished, the state gained the right to administer more subtle methods of punishment, such as to observe. The French sociologist Henri Lefebvre studied urban space and Foucault's interpretation of the Panopticon prison, arriving at the conclusion that spatiality is a social phenomenon. All right, what do they mean by spatiality? Is a term used in architecture for characteristics that, looked at from a certain aspect, define the quality of a space, in comparison to the term spaciousness, which includes formal, dimensional determination of size, depth, width, or height. Wait, all right. Spatiality is a higher category term. It includes not only the formal, but other qualities of space, such as definition, openness, visibility, expressivity, etc. Okay. Okay. Lefebvre contended that architecture is no more than a relationship between the Panopticon people and objects. These utilitarians are wild, man. They are wild. In urban studies, academics such as Mark Schulenberg argue that a different self-consciousness arises among humans who live in an urban area. I never heard of that, but I mean, it seems to make sense. I mean, that's something people can research. Mark Schulenberg argued that a different self-consciousness arises among humans who live in an urban area. I think someone once said, "Get the hell out of the city." I don't know who that was, though. In 1984, Michael Radford gained international attention for the cinematographic Panopticon he had staged in the film 1984. Of the telescreens in the landmark surveillance narrative 1984, which was made in 1949, George Orwell said, there was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. You had to live in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard and, except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. In Radford's film, the telescreens were bidirectional, and in a world with an ever-increasing number of telescreens devices, the citizens of Oceania were spied on more than they thought possible. In The Electric Eye, The Rise of the Surveillance Society in 1994, the sociologist David Lyon concluded that no single metaphor or model is adequate to the task of summing up what is central to contemporary surveillance, but important clues are available in 1984 and in Bentham's Panopticon. The French philosopher Gilles Deleuze shaped the emerging field of surveillance studies with the 1990 essay Postscript on the Societies of Control. Deleuze argued that the society of control is replacing the discipline society. With regards to Panopticon, Deleuze argued that enclosures are molds, but controls are modulation. Modulation means changing in some way. Deleuze observed that technology had allowed physical enclosures such as schools, factories, prisons, and office buildings to be replaced by a self-governing machine, which extends surveillance in a quest to manage production and consumption. Information circulates in the crowd society, just like products in the modern economy, and meaningful objects of surveillance are sought out as forward-looking profiles and stimulated pictures of future demands. Needs and risks are drawn up. All right, I think we kind of get the point here. I think we kind of get the point where they're going with this, that we're basically living in this society. Now, social media, now people are putting up themselves on social media. I'm doing it too, right? We're all watching each other. Now we're all watching each other, right? It's like the super, ultra, mega, transcendent Panopticon where we're all watching each other all the time now, right? We've transcended the Panopticon. I guess you could call it the Ultracon, the Ultra Opticon, right? Because we've transcended the Panopticon, so now it's like the Super Opticon, the Ultra Opticon, whatever you want to call it, right? So you can see how, libertarians and other anti-authoritarian type of people kind of are against this type of stuff. I think even Christians to some degree are against mental manipulation of, people in this manner. So, that's the concept. This is the book. If you want to check it out, you can probably get a PDF copy for free online. I'm pretty sure this guy's dead, so don't worry about, ripping him off or anything. So yeah, that's that. That's the video. It's 3:30. I'm still awake. I gotta get up. So I'll talk to you guys later, and peace.